Hello and welcome to the Repurpose Your Purpose podcast. I am Aurora Meneghello and I'm the founder of Repurpose Your Purpose. As I share about my work, I always say I open up space for your inner wisdom to show up during our work. And my focus is to help career changers, business owners, and leaders have a really great time at work with healthy professional relationships and whatever abundance and success means to you. So today is special. Every episode I feel like is really special to me, but maybe today a little bit more than most because over my career I've had the say good fortune to have a few amazing mentors. And Dr. Kelley here is one of my mentors that I absolutely have learned so much from. And I can't wait for him to share about his knowledge and his book, and we'll get into it. But first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Kelley, for joining me.
It's my pleasure to join you. That was so sweet, so nice of you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And let me start with your bio, okay? Because so everybody gets a little bit of an idea of who you are if they're not familiar with your work. Dr. Thomas Kelley is the Emeritus Professor of Psychology and Criminology at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. He's a licensed psychologist in private practice at Reflections Counseling Center in Troy, Michigan, where he uses exclusively the three principles understanding. And no worries, we'll tell you a little bit about the three principles if it's new to you. Dr. Kelley has authored over 100 peer reviewed papers and empirical studies in high impact academic and professional journals, over 30 of which are grounded in the three principles. He authored three principles based books: Falling in Love with Life, How Good Can You Stand It? And Upside Down and Backwards: The Innocent Failure on Mainstream Psychology. All right, so let me just tell everybody here who is joining us that I'm a Through Principles practitioner. It's probably not something you're aware of if you follow me, but that's really one of the, I would say, the foundation of my work. And the way I found Dr. Kelley is because I love reading different books on the three principles. And when I got his book, and I'm gonna put the link in the podcast episode page, no worries for everybody to find it, Upside Down and Backwards: The Innocent Failure on Mainstream Psychology. As I was reading it, like it just blew my mind that there were things that, even though I had been studying and practicing the three principles for a few years already, I really got to a different level reading this book. And I felt I wanted to reach out and learn from him, or at least talk to him in some ways. So, my first question for you, Dr. Kelley, is why did you write this book?
Before I say that, you just have just a wonderful, sweet, soft attitude about yourself when you're introducing me. And it just made me realize the impact that you must be having on the people that you see and talk with. So I just wanted to say that. Why did I write my book? There's probably a lot of reasons. And my reasons obviously come from my thinking at the time. And for a long time, my thinking overall was just not that healthy. Uh, my ego was kind of using up my life to prove that it was right. And by ego, it just simply was how I thought life was. What my thoughts had my life show up to me like. And you have to understand, we're human beings. We're part of the animal kingdom. We're subject to conditioning. And so along the way, we pick up thoughts that look real to us, but that aren't. They're low quality thoughts. They're thoughts that just kind of seep in. We just become a part of these thoughts. And as a result of that, we behave into a life that's being created by these thoughts, and we really don't know it. And so uh, the reason I even thought about writing a book was because I was looking for answers to increase my level of well-being and peace of mind and all of that. And I can remember, going through very, different types of psychology. I mean, right now, supposedly, there are 400 different psychologies. 400. Now, can you imagine if you had your car with a sick engine and there were 400 different ways of fixing the same engine? I mean, you see how confusing that might be? And that's how psychology was. I remember when I first started practicing, in the summer, we would have professional development seminars, and I'd go to the board and look at the ones, and there'd be one on neo-Freudian, another one on transactional analysis, another one on behaviorism, another one on reality therapy. And I would look at them and then I would leave and go and try to forget it all because I knew I couldn't go to all of them, and I didn't know which one to pick, but I wanted to pick one that would make a difference for me. Now, my ego during that time wanted me to write a book, not really to help people, but to be famous, to be special. Uh, and um, uh, and so I started several books, and but then I realized what I was doing was taking one of the 400 approaches that seemed to me to be the best at the time and kind of copying or another kind of uh, form of that book. The other thing that stopped me was because here I am trying to tell people about happiness and well-being, and I'm not happy well, I mean, I was at times. When I was happy? I was happy when my ego told me that I was special. Now, that really even wasn't happiness then, because when my ego told me it was special, it was a high. It was an ego high created by thoughts. Oh, I'm special. And then I guess what happens is your brain gives you a squirt of adrenaline or something, and then you have this feeling, and literally you become addicted to your ego because your ego is like a slot machine in Vegas that every now and then is going off because you've hit the jackpot, and boom, you get this feeling. Now, what happens, however, is it goes, because your mind gets off being special. And then, of course, now you're habituated to thoughts that you have to be special, and you're only as good as your last jackpot. And so you keep on going, and you're literally locked into this vicious circle, and you don't know how to get out. Well, I guess the next step for me along the way was that I read a book about a training that was going on in the 1970s. It was one of these kind of crazy trainings that people went to in the 70s. And this one was called the EST training. It later became the Forum. And I think you said that you had participated in,
Hmm.
in that
Yeah.
work. Well, this book was very interesting to me because it rang a bell for me. Something resonated in that book. And as I recall, what resonated for me was just this thought that I had innocently made up a story about who I was or should be, and that literally I was living my life like a character in a make-believe story. And and for some reason, that kind of separated me from who I was and who I was trying to be. But I didn't really get it. But there was something that intrigued me, and so I registered for this course. And at that time, it was held over 2 weekends, and it wasn't in Detroit area, so I had to fly to Chicago for 2 weekends to go to this course. And the course started at like 8 o'clock in the morning and went till 1 or 2 o'clock the next day. And we went through all kinds of crazy processes. and the trainer came in and called all of us assholes, and I'm thinking, what the heck is that? Actually, I realized that I was being an asshole because I was being my ego, and that's what the trainer was trying to tell us. But I didn't understand that, so a lot of people took it personally. Anyway, after 2 weekends, I saw people in that training, and a lot of people talked about their lives, and most of the people were there because they were in the same boat as me. Their egos were running them one way or another. And at the end of that training, many people appeared to have been transformed. In other words, people who were shy and upset and angry, all of a sudden became what appeared to be healthier. And that was a shock for me because there were people who appeared to get better in 2 weekends where I wasn't accomplishing that in 2 years in my therapy. But I had no idea why. No idea why it happened. And because I had no idea, I blamed it on the training. I thought, well, there's some magic, there's something in the training that did this for people. And when I left and I went into my first episode of kind of what I would call a low mood, not knowing where that came from, I said, well, I need to do more of this training. So I enrolled in seminars and kept on doing it. But I didn't find out why, what the reason was. So I kept on looking. And then I found another book. It was a book called Sanity, Insanity, and Common Sense.
I love that book. I actually found it. I love
Did you
it.
find that? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's great.
And interestingly, I a lot of what was in that book resonated with what I made the S training mean. And so I called one of the authors and asked, well, have you guys done that S training? And he said, well, no, we've been asked that before, but no, we haven't. And it just so happened that there was a conference on the principles in that book in St. Pete Beach, Florida, where I am now. That's where my mother and sister live. And so I went to the conference and found out that they were sharing the understanding in the book with people in very low income, disadvantaged communities, in jails and prisons. And of course, I was in the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Wayne State, and I saw the relationship. And so in 1989, I started writing about my understanding of what became what I'm passionate about now. And as a result of that, I found the answer. I found out what appears to me to be the true source, the one generic source of mental health and mental illness. And once I found that, then I could write the book. Then I could write the book. And so I wrote my first book with some mentoring from Roger Mills, who was one of the people, the main person that took this understanding into the Modelo housing project in South Florida. And literally that community was transformed from this understanding. So I must say there was one other thing. At the S training, when I didn't understand why, and I was being manipulated by my own thinking about it, they had all of the people in the training go up on the stage and declare something that they were passionate about. And so I went up there and I said, I am passionate about, and I declare that I am going to transform the field of criminology and psychology. And when I said that, it was simply based on what I saw. that there was something missing there and that psychology wasn't doing enough. And so that's really the purpose of the book now. Uh, I mean, if Oprah were to call me and say, come on your show, I would go on. And you know what? I would feel special because there's nothing wrong with ego and feeling special. It's just that you see it for what it is. And so you don't make any more of it than that.
Yeah, but what distracts me is that when you declare that, I'm guessing the energy behind it was very different than when you said you had that ego energy that was giving you the high, but also causing you to disconnect from yourself in a way. Like when you said that, it was coming from a different place.
Yeah, it was, and I didn't know where, but it was coming from me. It was coming from being me. I mean, I felt uncomfortable saying it because I didn't think, another thought I had was, who are you to say this? I mean, that's a big statement, big declaration. And so those thoughts were there, but it really was coming from what I wanted to do. It was coming from being me, but I didn't know that at the time.
So it might be helpful to very quickly share what the three principles are. So I'm gonna give it a 1 minute take on it, which is gonna be not enough at all, but just so everybody here listening gets an idea. So three principles is a metaphor to really explain how we experience life and how reality is created. And this goes very, very deep. And I would say the most basic part of this understanding says you can never quite get to the whole understanding. It's always something that can be, you can see more and more in it and get deeper and deeper. So the three principles are the principles of mind, consciousness, and thought. Mind is what, if you listen to me or you're familiar with my work, I call source. Okay, that means is that part that is beyond our intellect and it's connected to everything. So if you're a spiritual person, you would say even something spiritual. Okay. Consciousness is our ability to even have this conversation, to notice there are three principles. And the third principles, or they're not in order, it's however order you want, is the principles of thought. So the fact that we really experience reality through our thinking. Um, all right, I know you could say so much more about this, but does this more or less capture it?
Yeah. The only that I would say would be that we're a part of a system. I call it the human psychospiritual system. And we could talk about any system, an electrical system, uh, the heart-lung system within the body. Okay. Um, the better we understand how a system works, the better we can use it in our favor. And there are a lot of examples of that. For example, uh, the drag lift system that lifts airplanes, etc. I mean, for years, people were trying to figure out how to fly. They would jump off hills and fall, and people had wings that they were flapping because they were looking at the birds, and and eventually they figured it out. And so now look, we've got airplanes flying. So as far as I can see, there's a human psychospiritual system, and the principles are simply metaphors that point to how that system operates. And what I find for me anyway is that the understanding of how the system operates just makes sense to me.
That's what I experienced too once. And the interesting thing is that, and like I think we talked about this, like you feel you understand it and then you realize, oh no, 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 there's more. I didn't quite get it. Oh, now I understand. Oh no, 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 no. Like I now see even more about it. And that's also the beauty that we're trying to put into words as something that's beyond words and you can never quite capture it.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it gets back to to just being. There are different levels of being, to the degree to which people are being themselves. You know, when I made that declaration at the S training, I was in touch with it was coming more from who I am, who I'm being. Now, all of that is thought because there's no other game in town. It's just where are those thoughts coming from? And that's the key. Are they coming from our conditioning? Yeah, are they coming from some ideology that we've kind of aligned who we are with and are trying to be that ideology? Or are we trusting that there's a reason for each of us to be here? And to get in touch with that being is about the best that can happen in life. But there are many levels of that. It never ends.
Yeah, uh, one thing that helped me understand the difference is calling, uh, like, well, actually, I think you're going even beyond this, but sort of like having insights versus having thoughts. So where thoughts are like, okay, I'm used to think that it's very intellectual, all of that, versus an insight that it's something that comes from somewhere else and feels differently. That's what I was saying when you were telling your story of declaring who you're going to be. That was not a thought in the sense of, okay, I'm thinking what I want to do when I grow up, and this is what sounds like a good idea. Or it was something much deeper that it's a spontaneous, yeah, I don't even know. I always tell my clients, you have to start really learning how that feels to you. Because I kind of can recognize it sometimes. It has a very different feeling to me.
Mhm.
Um, but I do have a question about that because actually it's something that I want to learn something from you about this right now. So, in your book, you make the case that an understanding of the three principles alone is not enough to make a real difference. In other words, intellectually, you can grasp this in 5 minutes, right? People also need to have sufficient understanding of the power of thought and of their innate health in their lives in the moment and as a universal experience. So one thing that I noticed for myself and also with some clients is that it's sometimes common to mistake old patterns and beliefs for innate health and source. So I'll give you an example, okay? Sometimes when I feel down, I don't quite realize that, and it seems to me that my wisdom is telling me to do less or to do nothing. But that's very different than when I feel like doing less because I actually need to rest, right? But I get confused. I don't see it. Like it seems to me that that's my wisdom. And really what I need is to get out there and take some action. So how can we help ourselves, or if we're three principal practitioners, like I am, like how do we help others not fall into this misunderstanding, not misunderstanding some of our own patterns for
Mhm.
wisdom?
Well, it's interesting as you were talking about that your last statement was, what I really need is to get out there.
Oh
Now,
no.
now, just in terms of how you offered that passage, um, that last statement seemed to me that it was probably more likely coming from your wisdom. The other thing I would say is that any time that you're thinking about whether it's coming from your wisdom or not, it's not.
Okay, that's a great point, actually. That's right.
Anytime that you're saying, God, did that come from wisdom or not? Hold on here. I'd kind of like to sit down and take a nap, but hold on, is that my wisdom telling me to do? No, that's your conditioning telling you to do that. It's kind of interesting. The answer to that question would be a couple of things. The first thought I have is that when it's coming from your wisdom, you'll know. Um, and I know that's like you say, well, how will I know? And I would say, well, you'll know. you'll know. Um, it's just that this innate wisdom that we have gets so crusted over by our conditioning. And our conditioning really is just simply thoughts that we picked up along the way that we believe. And we've trained our brain that has no wisdom to give us those thoughts because, garbage in, garbage out, or the other way around. And so, you know, I can remember uh, there was one time when I was beginning to learn these distinctions that I got a phone call at my office. It was from a friend of mine. And he said, Kelley, why are you still doing that therapy stuff for crying? How can you do that? Talk to people about their problems all day. And he said, I'm doing expert witness work. I'm making twice as much an hour as you. Why don't you quit doing that and come and work with me in my practice? And I began feeling some anxiety, and my ego was still there. It was hooking on to things that he was saying, like more money. Uh, he's looking down on my practice. So there was some personalization going on with my thinking, but I had enough understanding to not be gripped by it. I noticed it, but wasn't gripped by it. And I said, Dan, let me give it some thought. And so I hung up the phone, and I remember kind of lying back, my head back in my chair, and feeling this anxiety, and but just kind of letting it settle. And it was later on that day that I just realized I don't want to do that. This is what I want to do. Now, it didn't come from analysis. It just came to me. But you see, I was more open to hearing that because until you are, uh, your conditioning will run you. I remember, I think it was Christine Heath, one of the people that is involved with the principles, gave an example of a guy who was in prison for a school shooting that he did as an adolescent. And he was now like 32, 33 years old. He'd been in prison, and the three principals had been brought into the prison, and he was understanding what we're talking about. And he said, "I'm away to the school that day. A thought came to mind for me saying, don't do this. You shouldn't do this. But then another thought came to mind. Oh, yeah, but you feel much better when you kill those boys." And he said, why didn't somebody tell me how thought works? Why didn't somebody tell me about innate wisdom? Because his own wisdom was trying to tell him not to go, but he didn't listen to it. Now, if Dan had called me 5, 10 years earlier and said the same thing, I could very likely be over there not doing as much of what really I want to do just to make money and have his approval.
It's so there's a couple of things that come to mind as you say this. One is that I used to do anti-bullying trainings in schools, and actually sometimes we would talk about that particular person, I think, and but never in those terms. So it's kind of for me when I heard you and Christine Heath share that, it was kind of yeah, it was particularly touching, I think. Working in with some of those topics in the past. But also one thing that I got from the three principles is, well, actually many things. Let me mention two that really come to mind as you're sharing. One is that I didn't know that if I felt uncomfortable between two decisions when I was younger, I could wait until something made sense to me. Like I felt I had to choose one of the two, and usually either was out of guilt, oh, but I should do this if I was a good person, if I was this, right? or it was out of like, well, you have to work hard, no pain, no gain kind of thing. So, and I look back and there's a number of decisions where if I had known that, well, actually, I can wait until I have a feeling inside of what that comes to me, just like you shared, right? Like, instead of like trying to push because you have to now do something or choose or all that, right? I really had no understanding of this whole thinking. Um, the other thing that for me personally, and then also as a coach, has made a huge difference is how common sense is a big part of the principles. Like, you don't have to constantly analyze everything, have more intellectual thinking about everything, spend a lot of time on a lot of theories. Like, if your mind quiets down and you settle, there's a lot of common sense and simplicity. And that was a big revelation as well.
That's a beautiful revelation. Um, we've deified intellectual thinking in this culture. In fact, if you were to ask people, is there another way to use the power of thought? Most people wouldn't be able to answer that, because for most people, what thought looks like is actively or deliberately thinking about something. Now, that way of thinking is very helpful, but it's not helpful for mental health. It can be used by mental health. I mean, our quiet, non-analytical mind has access to everything we know. Uh, when Tiger Woods or Michael Jordan go out into the game, uh, they were extra special because they were able to be in the flow, be in the zone. I mean, it's not that they forgot everything they learned when they were practicing. It's just that the way we're designed, if we just simply trust it, trust our design, trust the system to do what it's designed to do, will have us be at our best in the game, whatever the game is. I mean, as a therapist, for example, I used to go into my therapy sessions trying to do good cognitive behavior therapy. So instead of trusting my own health to guide me, I would be like listening to somebody intellectually, combining it with something in cognitive behavioral therapy and coming back with the answer based on that ideology. Well, that was stressful because I just wasn't, being in the flow, being in the zone. Now, there's nothing wrong with techniques. In fact, I'm doing a paper right now, positive psychology. You've heard of positive psychology?
Yeah.
It began back in the year 2000. And it was based on this, I think, reality that psychology was focusing mainly on dysfunction and mental illness. And so Martin Seligman and Mahai Csikszentmihalyi, I think that's how you pronounce it, started positive psychology. And these were people who were embedded into mainstream psychology, the hierarchy of the special people. Martin Seligman was the president of the American Psychological Association. And so everybody started listening. And so positive psychology started. Well, in 2001, the American Psychologist had a special issue devoted to positive psychology. American Psychologist is one of the top journals. And so I sent in a thing and I'm saying, look, if positive psychology doesn't understand principles, doesn't understand how the system works, they're going to end up in 10 or 20 years the same as mainstream psychology. A bunch of separate different theories, a bunch of separate different interventions. and they're going to be in trouble. And that critique was published in American Psychologist. 3 years later, I did the same thing in another journal called Adolescence. Last year, the end of last year, I'm writing a paper on positive psychology, criticized their one researcher found 117 unique criticisms of positive. They're criticizing its value as a science. They're criticizing its methodologies. Some of its major research studies haven't been replicated. They're in big trouble.
You know what? It's interesting that you bring that because I recently read Learned Optimism, like the book. I had never read it, and there's some very interesting things in there that made me think. But what really struck me is the fact that they did the experiments on the dogs, right? And that we sort of like there was this, well, at the time, it was normal and this and that. But I'm like, but then we are all like looking at people that were so disconnected from their heart, from what's in front of them, which is suffering of some beings that couldn't figure out that was not okay until they changed it. Like, to me, it's like I would want to learn psychology from somebody who was more in their heart and was ahead of me in being present to people's sufferings or animal sufferings or I found that very strange. And to me, it's another one of those things where we have so much, we give so much power to the intellect, to this form of separating ourselves from ourselves and what's going on, then very simple common sense things we don't even realize, and then we're trying to solve gigantic problems. That was the really big thing that struck me about that book, that I felt like I bet a whole lot of other people, regular people, would have thought it was not okay to have those experiments with the dogs without having to think so much and the degrees and all that. So yeah, there's a lot we can go over that, but I have another question for you. Look, because this is something actually that I bump into a lot when I try to explain to people who have not worked with me, that I do not work with their thinking. So, given I'm a coach, right? So coaching, of course, is based on a lot of psychology theory. And because now a lot of people are familiar with some psychological teachings, and many, at least here in Los Angeles, where I'm based, have been to therapy. So whenever I try to explain what I do, they imagine that we will work around reframing, essentially some coaching version of cognitive therapy. Okay.
Mhm.
So, one thing that I love about your book is that you wrote how the three principles are different from other strands of psychology traditions. And I was wondering if you can share the essence of why it's so important to understand that we think and not so much to focus on what we think. Because this is a really big distinction in the three principles, that it's about really seeing that we think. It's not about constantly taking apart everything we think to then reframe it. So help me out here. How can we talk about that so even I can talk about that and it'll be better?
I guess the first thing that comes to mind is the innocent misunderstanding that a lot of people have, certainly I had it, that who we are is our thoughts. Um, Thoughts come to mind from the moment we're born to the moment we die. For the most part, we're not causing those thoughts to come to mind. They just do. Now, I didn't know that for a long time. I thought when thoughts came to mind, I was kind of making them come to mind. Well, they are coming to mind through me, but it's just there's this energy that we're connected to that creates thoughts. And so we're having these thoughts. Now, cognitive behavior therapy takes these thoughts because some of them we don't like, some of them are discomforting. Feelings are just simply another dimension of thought. Perceptions are thought. They're just simply the same energy enlivens our senses. And then our senses enliven our thoughts and make them appear real to us from the inside out. So we're all living in this experience and we think it's who we are. Well, it is who we are, but we have the understanding. We can understand what's going on. Okay. So if I'm having discomforting thoughts and I think they're who I am, for example, if I have a thought that I'm stupid and I think it's the truth and it's who I am, that's a big, big difference than seeing it as just a stupid thought that I'm stupid. Big, 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 huge difference there. Because you know what? I get thoughts that I'm stupid every now and then, some variation of that. Now, if I didn't understand that it's just a thought, because we get thoughts, some are nice ones, some are bad ones. If I didn't, and now I go to a cognitive behavior therapist and say, well, why are you here, Tom? Well, I don't think I'm that good. I kind of think I'm stupid. Okay, so you get thoughts that you're stupid. Yes. Well, let's examine those thoughts. Now, do you do a lot of things really well? Well, yes. Well, I mean, if you were stupid, how could you do a lot of things really well? And then you could see where that would go. Okay, so now I convince myself that I'm not stupid and I feel better. Why? Because now I'm thinking thoughts that I'm not stupid. Those thoughts feel better than thinking that I'm stupid. But why do you need to do that if you just simply realize that we get discomforting thoughts and they're not who we are, and that when we feel a feeling of discomfort, that's a built-in signal that whoever designed us, whatever word you want to use for the designer, built into us to tell us what thoughts are healthy and what aren't.
Yeah, see, the difference for me is that when I experience that reframing as a coaching client or a patient or a therapist, it was a 50-50 chance. Sometimes that would work. Like you're like, oh, but here's proof you're not that or whatever. And then it would be like, oh, wow, yeah, that's actually something I'm just thinking. Like I saw that as a thought and essentially something I made up. And so, okay, fine. I don't have that anymore, right? But other times it created more thinking. Well, what about this? But what about that? Why am I thinking that? Maybe there's something wrong with me because I'm thinking that. So this is a true thing that I often tell people, which is so funny. But before I had any understanding of the three principles, right? So maybe 20 years ago, maybe a little bit less than 20 years, I don't know, a long time ago, okay. Uh, I was constantly looking for what was wrong with me. And in fact, it's a bit my default, like my conditioning thinking, something doesn't go, it's like, what's wrong with me? What do I need to fix, right? But even more than I do it now. So one of my friends who's older and wiser, at some point says, Aurora, you don't have any problems. You only have one problem. You keep thinking you have a problem. Right? And for a split second, I was like, oh. And then I thought, oh my God, you're right. That's my problem. How can I get over that? I constantly think I have a problem. So that I find that when we go too much, like understanding that thoughts are just what we do, and sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not, and the quality where they come from, it also points us in the direction of well-being. It really relieved so much of that I don't know, like constant feeling of there's something wrong with me, that. And again, it's not gone away. I have it sometimes often, but it doesn't bring me down so easily and so long because I understand, yeah, that's my mind sometimes, that's like it won't change the channel. It's like that's what's on TV, but it's just still on TV.
No, no, that's that, and that realization is what most people don't have. And see, we're all, as far as I can see, the vast majority of us are born, if not everybody, born mentally healthy. I mean, you don't have to teach a young child to be happy or curious or loving. Uh, and if you were to ask that child, what are you thinking? The child wouldn't even know what thought is. Child is just living in healthy, free-flowing thought. I think people,
Whatever.
if people could just realize they've got this built in, they've got this innate wisdom that's built in, and they don't have to, nothing wrong with reading books. There's nothing wrong with doing techniques, whatever. But the value of any of it comes from within. That's the source of it. It comes from within. And it isn't dependent on doing those things.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. Also, because again, as somebody who writes papers and is an academic and stuff, you definitely are not somebody who's like, don't read books, right? But I love reading books, but
Mhm.
there was a big difference that happened the more I understood the three principles, that before I was always looking for the answers in the books. Like I was
Yes.
always looking for like, oh, maybe they will tell me how to be happy. Maybe they will tell me how to solve my problems. Instead, now I have fun and everything. It's more like, oh, I just got this idea. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, no, no. Or like, ah, that's terrible. I really don't resonate. It's all fun. It's fun. And then sometimes it gives me that spark where something inside goes like, oh yeah, this would be good, and it's a
Yeah.
completely different relationship to
And
even
it's who
consuming
we are.
content.
It's why the research shows that at age 47, 86% of adults are mentally ill a lot of the
Wow.
time. At least they could be diagnosed with at least one mental illness by age 47. And the reason is right there with what we've been talking about. People just, it's innocent, 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 innocent. But that is sad, isn't it? And by age
Yes.
19, 56% are already not that mentally healthy. Only by age 19, only about 40% are still flourishing most of the time.
But I think it's very important to sort of clarify that what you mean is that they don't know they're caught up in some thinking, and that becomes like a diagnosis in some cases where it's like, well, actually, we don't know we're okay inside. There's a part of us that's okay, and it's always available to us.
Yeah. There's a paper that some of your listeners might want to look up. It's free, it's available. It's a paper that I authored with Bill Pettit, Jack Pransky, and Judy Sedgman, some people that are involved with principles. And it's called Only One Generic Mental Illness. And that paper focuses on what we're talking about. And that one generic mental illness is just simply being conditioned to obscure, to get in the way of our own mental health with unhealthy use of the power of thought. And when we do that over and over and over again, like Bill Pettit, one of the authors who's a psychiatrist, said that he used to ruminate and worry 4 to 6 hours a day. And that creates chronic mental stress. And over time, you're going to have symptoms, physical symptoms, mental symptoms. You can hallucinate. You can be, all kinds of things. You go to a psychologist, okay, you got this, you got that. Okay, now I got to go to the diagnostic book to get paid. And so, you get 403.2, which is whatever. And that book keeps getting thicker and thicker every year.
Well, that's the thing that, I've experienced that the more, it was that example I was telling you about my friend saying you only have a problem, that you think you have a problem. Like, once I started to get, and I by no means I think I'm there completely, but once I started to get, oh no, there's actually a part of me that's okay all the time. It doesn't go away. Sometimes I get disconnected, like I don't feel it, but it's still there.
Mhm.
And I started to see my thoughts not as me, but more as like, oh, okay, sometimes I have some really bad thoughts and they'll pass, right? Or I can count on some better thoughts at some point.
Mhm.
I started to relax. Like a lot of things, like I started to relax. I started to feel less scared all the time.
Mhm.
I started to take some anxiety in stride, right? Still have
Mhm.
anxiety, but I don't then have anxiety over having anxiety, which is a whole thing.
Mhm.
Um, like it's quite unbelievable the difference it can make to
Well,
just
we get we
understand
get
this.
we get ill every now and then physically, and when we know what it is, we can still not feel good, but still feel relaxed. I mean, when I've had the flu or when I've had a cold or I had a little bit of TMJ strain in my jaw, uh, I once I knew what it was and what I needed to do, I still didn't feel that great, but I wasn't all upset. And if people could see that with the mental flu,
I like that. Yeah, you talk about the thought flu, that
yeah,
it's
we
just
get
like,
thought
yeah,
attacks, right?
yeah, thought attacks.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah. When you
Um,
don't know what it is, when I would have that way back, I would worry about, God, am I ever going to feel good again? What's wrong with me? And then and I would be happy that I felt better, but because I didn't understand what it was. And that's I think another part of why this is so enlivening because people don't understand why they are feeling insecure and make it mean more than it means, and then they go out and try to find a way to cope with it. And we all develop these coping mechanisms. And
yeah,
yeah,
I can talk to you for another few hours, but in the
yeah,
interest
I got to
of
get
wrapping
going
this up,
myself.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I wanna ask you to wrap this up, briefly. You don't have to talk a ton about it, but just like briefly, what is inner wisdom to you? How would you describe that for everybody? So really want to leave everybody looking in that direction.
Well, inner wisdom to me is just simply one part of the intelligence that is built into me and to you and to everybody uh, by this intelligent energy of the universe. We're just designed with it, and we can think we aren't.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly, for joining me today. It's
Oh, my
really been a
pleasure.
pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Uh, so, if anybody wants to get in touch with you or get your book, how can they do that?
Well, the books, my first book is out of print, but the other two, How Good Can You Stand It and Upside Down and Backwards, are both on Amazon. If people go on Amazon and just put Kelley next to the title, or even without the
I'll
title, it
put the
should come
links.
up. Yeah,
Yeah, I'll
yeah,
put the links.
yeah. And if anybody, reads the book and wants to ask me any questions on it, just have them get in touch.
And everybody listening to this, my name again is Aurora Minigallo. Don't contact me for any therapy because I don't do any of that. I'm just very interested in these conversations. However, if you want to have a good time at work, understanding how thought trips you up can be really helpful. And that's why the three principles are so close to my heart. All right. Have a wonderful day. And Dr. Kelly, I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, I will talk to you soon. You
Thank
take
you.
care.